All right, so we're diving deep into Say Nothing, the TV show based on Patrick Radden Keefe's book. And you mentioned it really got you thinking about the troubles in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's such a complex and gripping story.
It is hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and you know what's so fascinating to me is how the show brings this history to life. Focusing on the human stories inside this big political conflict.
Yeah.
It's really compelling.
And you mentioned being intrigued by how Say Nothing portrays Gerry Adams.
Right.
Isn't it wild that his voice was banned from the BBC during the Troubles?
It's crazy.
They had to use voice actors.
I know. The irony is almost too perfect because one of those voice actors was Stephen Rea.
What?
Who later married Dolores Price.
Oh my gosh.
A key figure in the IRA.
That's wild.
It's really interesting how it highlights the blurred lines between art and politics and personal lives during that time.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't seen the show, let's give them a little background on the Troubles. This was a brutal conflict in Northern Ireland that lasted for decades.
Decades.
From the late 1960s to the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And at its core, it was a fight between those who wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, mainly Protestants,
Right.
and those who wanted to become part of the Republic of Ireland, mainly Catholics.
And it's important to understand that while religion played a role, it wasn't just a simple religious conflict.
Right.
It was rooted in centuries of historical grievances and political divisions and social inequalities.
Yeah.
Over 3,500 people died.
It's a lot.
And the trauma of that period still impacts Northern Ireland today.
Yeah, and that human cost is something Say Nothing really brings home.
It does.
Especially through the story of Jean McConville, a widowed mother of 10.
Yes, her case is so powerful because it shines a light on the disappeared,
Right.
those who were abducted and secretly buried by the IRA.
Wow.
Jean McConville was accused of being an informer,
Oh,
although no evidence ever supported her
wow.
remains weren't found until 2003.
Oh my gosh.
Imagine the agony of her family not knowing for all those years.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And you can't help but notice this theme of silence that runs throughout the whole show.
Right.
Even the title, Say Nothing itself,
Yes.
is taken from a Seamus Heaney poem,
Mm-hmm.
reflecting on that enforced silence surrounding the conflict.
It's true. It's like this weight of unspoken truth hangs over the characters.
Yeah.
And the series explores that through the controversial Boston College tapes,
Right.
recorded interviews with former IRA members
Yeah.
that offer a glimpse into this hidden world,
Wow.
but also raise a lot of ethical questions.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And two figures who feature prominently are Dolores and Marion Price.
Yes.
Sisters who join the IRA,
Right.
Say Nothing, shows their journey, their radicalization, their involvement in bombings, their hunger strike while imprisoned in England,
Right.
and eventually their disillusionment with the peace process.
Their story really embodies the complexity of the conflict. On one hand, you can understand their motivations given the discrimination and violence that they face.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, their actions had devastating consequences.
Right.
Their willingness to go on a hunger strike, even to the point of death, highlights the intensity of their commitment.
It's a difficult story to grapple with
It is.
because it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about the human capacity for both idealism and violence.
Absolutely. And their eventual disillusionment with the peace process
Yeah.
demonstrates just how challenging it was to reconcile the ideals of the movement with the compromises of a negotiated settlement.
Yeah.
They felt deeply betrayed.
Oh, wow.
Like their sacrifices meant nothing in the end.
Wow.
And this complexity is amplified when we look at Gerry Adams' Say Nothing, portrays him as a central figure in the IRA, even though he's always denied any involvement.
Right.
And it's important to remember the disclaimer at the end of each episode, acknowledging this contested history.
Yeah. It's almost as if the series wants to challenge viewers to think critically, about the information presented and not take anything at face value.
Right.
He's been called both a mastermind behind the IRA's violence and a peacemaker who helped bring the Troubles to an end.
It's this ambiguity that makes him such a captivating figure, and his refusal to be interviewed for the book or the series just adds to the mystery.
It really does.
What do you make of this as someone engaging with this story?
Honestly, it's a puzzle. On one hand, you have these accounts from former IRA members like those in the Boston College tapes that paint a certain picture of him.
Right.
But then you have his consistent denials and the lack of definitive proof. It really makes you question the nature of truth and how we interpret history.
Precisely. The series doesn't shy away from presenting conflicting narratives and leaving it to the viewer to kind of piece together their own understanding.
Yeah.
And this approach mirrors the reality of the Troubles, where truth was often a casualty of the conflict itself.
It makes you wonder how much we'll ever truly know about what went on behind closed doors.
Right.
And speaking of unanswered questions, Say Nothing really delves into Gene McConville's case.
Yes.
And the details are just chilling.
Her story is particularly haunting because it speaks to the brutality and ruthlessness of the conflict.
Yeah.
She was a mother dragged from her home in front of her children and never seen alive again.
It's awful.
The show really captures the lasting trauma this inflicted on her family.
It's almost unbelievable that the IRA denied any knowledge of her disappearance for years.
I know.
Leaving her family in a state of agonizing limbo. And as if that wasn't cruel enough, they sent a postcard to her children from Blackpool, leading them to believe she might still be alive.
That detail just underscores the psychological manipulation at play.
Wow.
The show effectively uses the McConville case to illuminate the devastating ripple effects of the conflict, not just on those directly involved, but on their families and communities.
And you can't discuss this case without talking about the Price sisters. Say Nothing doesn't shy away from their involvement in the IRA's operations, including their potential roles in the abduction of suspected informers.
Right, and it uses their story to raise crucial questions about the moral complexities of the conflict. Dolores Price in the Boston College tapes admitted to driving Gene McConville across the border.
Okay.
But she maintained that she wasn't involved in her execution.
Right, but the show takes it further, suggesting that Marion Price might have been the one who pulled the trigger. Based on Dolores Price's own account.
Exactly, and this brings us back to that theme of conflicting narratives.
Yeah.
Marion Price has always vehemently denied any involvement in Gene McConville's murder.
Right.
And this clash of accounts highlights the challenges of uncovering the truth about the Troubles. It's like piecing together a puzzle where some pieces are missing and others might be intentionally misleading.
It really makes you question everything you see and hear, both in the show and the broader context of the Troubles. How do you, as an expert, navigate these conflicting accounts when trying to understand what really happened?
It's a constant process of weighing evidence and considering different perspectives, and acknowledging that there may never be a definitive answer.
Right.
It's important to avoid simplistic explanations and to recognize the nuances inherent in a conflict like this.
That makes sense. It's not about finding a neat and tidy narrative.
Right.
But rather about grappling with the messiness of history. It's almost as if the show is asking viewers to become active participants in this process of uncovering the truth.
I think that's a great way to put it. Say Nothing encourages us to think critically, to question the information we're presented with, and to recognize that history is often told from the perspective of the victors. It's about giving voice to those who were silenced and acknowledging the complexity of their experiences.
And the show does a fantastic job of illustrating how this complexity played out in real life.
It does.
The blurred lines between fact and fiction, the media manipulation, the personal betrayals, it's all there.
Absolutely. The show's exploration of the IRA's use of propaganda and media control is particularly insightful. Okay.
They understood the power of shaping public perception.
For sure.
And the show reflects that by mirroring those tactics within its own storytelling.
And this approach forces us to confront the fact that our understanding of the Troubles, even today, is heavily influenced by the narratives that have been dominant over the years.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being reminded that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. And that brings us back to the title, Say Nothing.
Right.
It seems like there are so many layers to what that phrase could mean, in the context of the Troubles.
Absolutely. On the surface, it might seem like a warning.
Yeah.
A plea to stay silent to avoid trouble.
Yeah.
But as you get deeper into the story, you realize it's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
It makes you think about who benefits from silence.
Yeah.
Whose stories are being suppressed and what happens when those silences are finally broken.
It also raises questions about the burden of truth. Is it always liberating to speak out? Or can silence sometimes be a form of self-preservation?
A way to protect oneself and those you love from further harm. These are not easy questions to answer.
Yeah.
And the show doesn't offer, simple solutions.
Instead, it presents us with these morally ambiguous situations and invites us to wrestle with them.
Exactly.
Take the Price sisters, for instance.
Right.
Their decision to participate in the Boston College tapes,
Yeah.
to break their silence after all these years, ultimately had significant consequences.
Their testimony shed light on previously hidden truths, but it also led to legal battles and reignited old wounds.
Wow.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of truth can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And that even with the best intentions, there can be unintended consequences.
It really makes you appreciate the delicate balance the show strikes between revealing information and protecting those involved.
Yes.
And this complexity extends to how it handles the sensitive topic of violence. The show doesn't glorify the actions of the IRA.
Right.
But it also doesn't shy away from showing how individuals were drawn to the movement, often out of a sense of desperation or a belief that violence was the only way to achieve their goals.
Right. It acknowledges the seductive allure of violence, especially in the context of a protracted conflict where people feel oppressed and marginalized.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't let viewers forget the devastating human cost of that violence.
And it's not just the physical cost.
Yeah.
The show does a remarkable job of portraying the lasting psychological trauma of the Troubles.
Right.
How it permeated every aspect of life, even years after the official ceasefire.
It did.
The characters are haunted by their experiences, struggling to cope with guilt, grief, and the ever-present fear of retaliation.
It's a powerful reminder that peace agreements and political solutions don't magically erase the pain of the past.
Right.
Healing from trauma takes time, and it requires acknowledging the deep wounds that have been inflicted.
Yeah.
Say Nothing captures this ongoing struggle beautifully.
And this focus on the individual experience, I think, is what makes this show so impactful. We're not just learning about historical events. We're witnessing the profound effects of those events on real people. It forces us to confront the human dimension of the conflict.
Absolutely.
In a way that news reports and history books often can't.
By centering the narrative around individual stories, the show creates a sense of empathy and understanding.
Right.
It helps us see beyond the political rhetoric and recognize the shared humanity of all those involved, regardless of which side they were on.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Say Nothing, what's the key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think it's the importance of engaging with history in a critical and nuanced way.
Yeah.
The Troubles were a time of immense complexity, and the echoes of that conflict continue to reverberate today.
They do?
Say Nothing encourages us to go beyond simplistic narratives, to listen to the silenced voices, and to recognize that the search for truth and reconciliation is an ongoing process.
Beautifully said. This has been such a fascinating exploration, and I encourage you to continue diving deeper into this story. Check out the book, explore different perspectives, and draw your own conclusions. It's a journey well worth taking. Thanks for joining us.